Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us once again today, it is Jesse Newell of the Kansas City Star. He covers all things Kansas Jayhawks. Obviously, the Jayhawks are in the Final Four. Jesse, we're going to start here. That 20 minutes on Sunday against Miami, that was the best 20 minutes KU's played all season. True or false?
Pretty close. If it wasn't that, then you'd probably go back to the Missouri game or the
So I
K-State game
thought
at
first half
home.
Missouri was my other thought.
Yeah, the Missouri game, K-State game at home, and then the Baylor game at home. But all for different reasons. Like against K-State, KU just couldn't miss any shots. So that's one thing. And then KU was kind of suffocating defensively against Baylor and got all the rebounds. But when you're in the Elite Eight and you can outscore a team in the Elite Eight 47-15.5, things are going your way. You're playing pretty well. And I was asked earlier this week, is that butting up against KU's ceiling? And if it's not, then KU's got a crazy ceiling that might be higher than that. Because, if you outscore a team that has made it to the Elite Eight by 32.5 and keep them to 15 points of offense, that's really good. So the Jayhawks defense has kind of been on a steady incline here lately, which is a credit to them. But the lid hadn't come off the whole tournament, and they sort of played nervous and with jitters and whatever you want to say, tight. But it didn't look like that in the second half. They got things going, and it was really impressive. It's a really impressive way to head into the Final Four.
So I asked you if that's the best 20 minutes. Which game do you think was the best 40? What was the best game that KU's played all season? Because I've tried to rack my brain because it feels like there's still another level for this team. Like what we saw for 20 minutes against Miami. Like do that twice in a game, two halves, and then do that the next game, or at least a version of that next game. Because I feel like they're in the Final Four, right? They're there, but we haven't seen it. I feel like, I don't know. If you watch them every single game, I still feel like we haven't seen it back-to-back games. Like it's like there's always something that's not firing during one game, but one part of their game picks it up.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we want to go back and nitpick that game against Miami where they win by 26, the first half, KU 6 of 12 on layups and dunks, 0 for 5 from 3, and 3 for 9 from the free throw line. So you're talking about a team that won by 26 points and couldn't make a basket in the first half. Not a basket close, not a basket far away, not a basket at the free throw line that you practice all the time. Listen, this team all year has won with offense. They've sort of outscored their problems. And then late in the year, they've really locked down defensively so that they could kind of hang in there when the shots weren't going down. And then against that one half against Miami, they put it all together. So, maybe 40 minutes. I would say the closest is, that Baylor game at home, they blew out Baylor when Baylor was a top 10 team coming in. And we know how good Baylor was. I know Baylor lost to North Carolina. They made the frantic comeback, but Baylor had an amazing season. Tied for the Big 12 title. They had the injuries and played through them. Were dominant. Scott Drew, coach of the year in the conference. They had an amazing year. So for Kansas to put the beat down on them at Allen Fieldhouse, that was probably their best performance. But, Miami is impressive to have that happen in one game. And I think you're right. I think the level this team can reach to is once they've gotten to the Final Four, can they relax? Can they exhale?
Yeah.
Can they let the game come to them? Because for too often, it sure seemed like Ochai Agbaji had the weight of the world on his shoulders. And Christian Brown all of a sudden lost his shooting confidence. And Dave McCormick wasn't playing his best. All these holdovers in the NCAA tournament for Mill South, they were not playing well. And that's really where Remy saved them. If all those guys can just let it out, play like they did in the second half, take the shots that they've taken all year, then potentially this Kansas team gets back to the offense they've had all year. You add that to the defense they've been playing lately, then they'd be the best team left in this field.
So everybody's mentioned about, like, every time I hear an interview, this is not Bill Self's best team. This is not Bill Self's most talented team. This is not his best defensive team. But they win at such an impressive clip. So, like, what are they then? Like, what does this make them? A team that has won the Big 12, right? They won the Big 12 tournament. They are now in the Final Four. Like, what is, especially if they finish the job, like, not saying that to go down as something as the best or the greatest in this category, but like, what do you think this group is? Because, they have the moments against Miami. They can't make anything, right? They had games this year where many games, Bill Self was not pleased with their defense, right? So like this group has been this, it's been that, it's not been this, it's not been that. What is this group to you?
Well, I don't disagree with those people. The thing about Bill Self, though, is anytime you can talk about a team that's a number 1 seed and you're just basically saying, this is middle of the pack for a Bill Self team. That's a pretty good 19-year run you have going. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty
Right.
nice as a fan base if you're sitting there and sort of complaining about the team that they just happen to be a 1 seed this year too. So I think the standard at Kansas has been raised, even from Roy Williams, which was a crazy standard. Bill Self's even raised that a step higher to have that. But I also think that's just an indication that the NCAA tournament is fun to watch. It's entertaining. It brings the nation together to watch it, but it's a really crappy way to pick a champion. I mean, let's just be honest. I
Right.
mean, if Gonzaga was still in this thing, Gonzaga would be favored over Kansas. And if, Houston had been able to win one more game, they'd be favored against Kansas. And if Arizona had run into the Houston Buzzsaw, they'd be favored against Kansas. But the Jayhawks can only play the teams in front of them, and the teams in front of them were basically all upsets. And those upsets helped Kansas where when they weren't playing well, they still were in games where they were like Creighton. They didn't play well against Creighton. They were still an 11 and a half
Right.
point favorite. So it gives you this margin for error that you can play tight and play crappy and you still can win the game. So you don't apologize. And the Final Four banner is not going to have a strength of schedule metric on it. So good for Kansas. And to be completely honest, the Jacks have had some really crappy bracket luck here lately when you look at the past few years when every team that they face has been up to their seed, and they've also had difficult paths. I mean, last year they had USC in front of them, then Gonzaga potentially in the Elite Eight to try to get to the Final Four. So you don't apologize for when this falls right, but I mean, Kansas has played well. Kansas has taken care of business. Kansas is playing better defense than it has all season, but Kansas took advantage of some breaks too, and they're going to get another break here against Villanova because they have a guy out that they've been relying upon all year, and it's probably going to cost Villanova 2 or 3 points because they're not that deep on the bench. So the Jacks deserve credit, but you also look at this and say, hey, how can a team that is not as good as 2010, not as good as 2011, not as good as 2016, not as good as 2017, not as good as 2020, how does that team make a Final Four when those teams didn't? Well, for one, they have the NCAA tournament, not have COVID call it off like 2020. But the other part of it is that, some things fell their way and they came through when they needed to. So kudos to this year's team. And now they have a great chance at the national title.
And hey, it's not like they didn't play a tough schedule during the season, right? I mean, they played in the Big 12. So there's some schools, I'm looking at the bottom of the Big 10, that were like, wow, what a tough schedule. And it turns out when they play anybody else outside the conference, that they're, not as good as we thought they were, right? So, the Jayhawks had to kind of pay it forward, I guess, in a certain way. But, I mean, I think you made a good point about this being a weird way to pick a champion. Like the only time I can think where it worked out, we got the two best teams, Baylor Gonzaga last year. Like the fact that both those teams actually made it to the title game, and Gonzaga came about as close as you could to not making it with that UCLA game. It's amazing. We always end up with teams that we feel like we shouldn't have, whatever. But I want to ask you about a couple guys in this team. So the Oshai stuff, you're gonna get too many questions about that. I'm not gonna ask you about that. Remy Martin, we all know he's been really good, cool, great. Circle of trust, wants to get in there, playing great. Jalen Wilson is scoring a tough basket whenever Kansas needs it. Am I wrong here? I'm like, Kansas needs a basket, and Jalen Wilson's muscling his way to the rim and getting two. It happened against Providence. I think it was, I'm not sure if Miami was on a 4-0 run, but I think they were down, KU was down like 4-6, and he got a tough basket. He just seems like when he puts his head down, it's like, Jalen, do not shoot the three, go to the rim. He's getting, what KU needs at the right times.
Yeah, he's playing less scared than the other guys too. I mean, just to call it like it is, like Remy has saved them because he's come in and just been like, "Oh, guys, it's basketball. Just shoot the shots. Whatever. It's not a big deal. Just come in here and shoot." And he saved Kansas in both, a couple of those games. What it was Providence or Creighton, where Jayhawks were kind of deer in the headlights. Like, no pass. I don't want to take the shot. Here, you take the shot. No, I don't want to take the shot. And so Jalen Wilson has been the least scared of those guys. I kind of talked to him a couple days ago about this, and I said, I mean this as a compliment, but do you get to a point where, Bill Self will yell at you about shot selection, but you get to a point where you just sort of ignore that? And he goes, yeah. I mean, that's how you have to play.
Right.
You've got to play with that free mind. You've got to be able to sort of tune him out when you need to, because otherwise nobody will take a shot. I mean, there's no perfect shots in the NCAA tournament. That's the bottom line. Somebody's got to fire it up. And I do think the other thing about Jalen, I mean, he has rebounded the heck out of the ball too.
Yeah.
And if you look at the last couple opponents that Kansas has faced, I know some of them haven't really crashed the offensive glass. Creighton and Miami don't do that much, but man, he's been in there and he's been battling. And not only that, he had that one offensive rebound, the hustle play to Ochai Agbaji to get him the ball in the corner against Miami. That was one of the biggest plays of the game in that one as well. And sort of got Ochai going too. So part of it was that, Ochai made some shots, but part of it was Jalen Wilson made a hustle play to get him an open shot and finally take the lid off the basket for him. So yeah, I think it's good for Jalen. I had a story up earlier this week on the Kansas City Star about him. It's kind of fascinating. And we talk about Ochai, and he tested the NBA waters, and he got kind of inspired when the guys told him, hey, you need to be more aggressive. And Jalen Wilson heard from the NBA guys, and they said, hey, dude, you got to make some free throws. Like, how do you expect to be in the league if you can't make free throws? So important. If you look back, the two close games KU had, Creighton and Providence, Jalen Wilson, 9 for 9 from the free throw line. He was a 61% shooter from the free throw line last year. So a credit to him for building on what he did last season. I think that's kind of the key for this Kansas team, is that Ochai came back, got a lot better in the offseason. Jalen Wilson came back, got a lot better in the offseason. Christian Brown came back, got a lot better in the offseason. And so this team that might not have been as good last year or had as high of a ceiling, the reason they're really good this year is because all those guys worked hard in the offseason and improved their game.
Well, I think that's the one thing that's not really talked about, is that this was the same group that got their asses kicked by USC. Like, absolutely got their asses kicked by USC. And, you had Remy, you had Jalen Coleman-Lands, but it's just, Remy goes out with the injury. It was the same group. This was the same group that we talked about, last year that just came up short, and they all got better. For Jalen as an NBA player, do you think he leaves? Because I think one more year as potentially like maybe the guy, whatever. I just want him to get locked in the gym, shoot threes, do ball handling drills. And it's like, I want to see him more with the basketball. I think this is something that the next level could be something substantial if he worked on those things. Now, KU does not need him to do those things. That's not his role on this team. But maybe next year's team, do you think it could be a possibility? And what do you think about his NBA future at this, at short term, I guess I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him on many mock draft boards.
Right.
So I see Christian, I see Ochai, but I don't see him.
Mm-hmm.
And there sort of now is a perfect example of what it can happen if you come back which is what Ochai did. He came back this year. He became the team's aggressive alpha dog sort of guy for most of the season. He took over, became a first-team All-American, and now you're seeing him potentially in the lottery for next season. Listen, I'm just being honest here about Jalen Wilson. He's a great player. I enjoy talking to him. He thinks the game in a very good way too, but he is not overly athletic. And so if you're going to play, 6'8" guard on that level and, kind of the guard sort of position, you've got to make sure you shore up the things that you can shore up. So again, he's a good rebounder. He's a good right-hand driver. He's improved his free throw shooting. He's improved his arsenal in the lane, which I wrote about earlier this year, working with Peter Daniliv here in Lawrence, a trainer that a lot of the KU guys have worked with to kind of get some of their individual training up. But I think for Jalen, I think you're right. I mean, you got to be able to make threes more consistently. He's done better this year, but it could even take another step. And defensively, working on being able to slide your feet. Again, he's gotten a lot better this year. And some of the key defensive plays he's made late were not ones he was making earlier in the season. But it does feel like that, probably with another year that potentially he could have an Ochai-like jump there, or at least get himself where it's a slam dunk, no doubt sort of scenario that he's in the NBA and his name's going to get called. And remember, he's just a redshirt sophomore, so there's plenty of time still available for him in college if he wants to go that route.
All right, so the Villanova matchup, you'll answer this question a million times, but is this a contrast to styles with the, KU wants to run thing, Villanova's slow? Is this all right, KU should feed David McCormick type game? Because I will say this. So when Kansas is like, we think we have a mismatch or we think we have an advantage, they're just like, we're going to feed David from the beginning of the game. Like, it's like, there's no bones about it. They're going to okay, they go down, they give him the ball, they give him the ball, they give him the ball, which I like. It's like, all right, we're going to get him going early. What's this matchup like for KU against Villanova?
Well, I think we can get kind of too tied into matchups sometimes, because for every positive thing you can talk about, there's also a negative thing on the other side of things. So big picture, I think it's important for Bill Self to play his best players. You know what I mean? Like, that sounds so simple, but if you just talk yourself into Villanova plays this way, so how do you match up with Villanova? How do you do then you start to play your 10th or 11th best player to match down to a Villanova team that has no depth. And all of a sudden that doesn't make much sense either. But having said that, there is a little bit of PTSD from 2018 too, because this is a very similar matchup in that sort of way where Kansas marched into the Final Four. They played Villanova. They knew what the mismatch was, which is throw the ball to Udoka Azubuike, and he probably couldn't guard his man on the other end. And what happened? Doak didn't get going early. Villanova made some threes over him, and then KU the rest of the way was kind of lost. And so Bill Self talked at his press conference in Lawrence on Tuesday about, hey, I have some things, I have some notes written down. He wouldn't go into them, obviously, but I have some things I want to change up potentially if things happen. And so I think he's going to have a quick trigger finger. I don't think he's going to wait around for 5 or 6 or 7 3-pointers to go through before he matches for match. But at the same time, I mean, as I talked about, the mismatch on one end is the mismatch on the other end. And we're talking about a Villanova team now without Justin Moore that is razor thin when it comes to depth. So
Right.
if you dump that ball into David McCormick a few times and he draws a couple fouls, which is what he does, you're putting Villanova in an even worse spot. You know what I mean? Like then all of a sudden they got nobody they can go to, or at least nobody they can go to that they trust. So I guess I would caution here if I was Bill Self. I mean, I understand what happened in 2018. I understand they got bombed away in that game, but that seems like an outlier to what Villanova made 17 or 18 threes in that game. I mean, that's really impressive. That's probably more than you would expect them to make, even if they were all wide open. So KU did get run out of the gym, but at the same time, I think if it progresses to the point where Bill Self is extensively playing Zach Clements or KJ Adams or a guy that he really hasn't played many minutes this entire tournament, it's probably a step too far. Because if you're looking at this from Jay Wright's standpoint, you're looking at the same thing going, how in the world do you guard David McCormick? You know, how do you stop him? What do you do? And what happens if he does draw fouls like he normally does? You know, how do you go to your bench in that aspect? How do you manage a first half with foul trouble? So, like I said, we can talk matchups over and over. I just, if I was Bill Self, I would try it as much as I could. And maybe this change will stop to be made. He's a great in-game coach, but I would try to take a deep breath as much as I could to look and say, what are Kansas's best 6 or 7 players? Who has gotten you to this point?
Right.
And try not to veer too much away from that, just because right now, the biggest game of the season, your best players need to determine if you're going to win or not.
I'm 100% with you on that. And then the question also you're getting a lot is, who would Kansas rather play in the championship game? Which game? So my take is I'd rather play Duke, because if Carolina beats Duke, that means Carolina's just scorching hot. Like they continue the same stuff. And this is the problem is that I also think Duke. One really interesting is Duke cannot play zone against Carolina. If Duke plays zone against Carolina, they're going to lose that game by 20 points. Like I don't know if you want guys searching for Armando Bacot on offensive rebounds, no box out assignments, and then pass the ball out and them nailing threes. I think it's a disaster. If Carolina wins, though, I think it means they maintain their hotness. I think they're such a well-balanced team. They have a little bit of everything, which is, kind of what I like to see. Who would you rather have? Who would Kansas rather face, you think, in your opinion?
Maintain your hotness. I like it. Sound like a dating app or something.
Yes, maintain your hotness.
That was good. So
that's the dumb way of saying keep playing well. There you go.
Yeah, that's I'll disagree with you.
Okay.
So, you look at these numbers and we can talk about momentum and what's going on and what's happened recently. But the bottom line is you want to take from a bigger sample size. And the bigger sample size of the season would tell us Duke is better than Carolina. And that's reflected in the Vegas line. What, they're 3.5 or 4-point favorites in this game. Yeah. So if you're looking at this, you would rank the teams right now probably Kansas, Duke, Villanova, North Carolina. So from a Kansas standpoint, I just talked about this where they faced Creighton and they didn't play well against Creighton, but they were 11.5-point favorites. So you can make some mistakes and still not give up 11.5 points. Same thing with Providence. They're 7.5-point favorites. They don't play that great. They, get behind in the second half, but they make the run and come back because, hey, you have some margin for error there. Against Carolina, KU would have margin for error. I mean, that's the bottom line. They would be 5 or 6 point favorites in that game, maybe 4 to 5, 5 to 6, something like that. So I would say that Kansas fans, if they're not partying hard after that KU win, which they'd probably be anyway on Mass Street, they should be cheering for North Carolina because it's an easier path to the national championship. I just said, you don't put on the banner national championship. Oh, by the way, it was an easy schedule. You put national championship. However, if you're asking me, which would be better, I mean, obviously Kansas Duke. I mean, come on, like Coach K's last game. Oh my goodness! And I'll tell you this: from the 2018 Final Four, Bill Self never makes this about himself. He never talks about himself personally. He always deflects credit. He always talks about him and his staff when he is speaking about these things. But I can tell you, when it is Kansas Duke, when it is him and Coach K, And when they're trying to pick out any small little detail thing that they can get, you talked about Duke zone earlier that they ran, and in 2018, KU exposed Duke zone to get some open threes from the corner from Malik Newman in that Elite Eight game. He takes a
Yes.
special level of pride in going against the best. And I'm telling you what, there would be nothing more in this world to fire him up than to play Coach K in his final game with a national title on the line. I mean, that
Yeah.
would be tremendous. So that's what I'm cheering for. There you go. If I'm still there in New Orleans covering Kansas on Monday, I want to see the Kansas Duke matchup, but Kansas North Carolina will be plenty of fun too. That is if Kansas obviously makes it past Villanova.
All right. So some quick predictions. First of all, how many first night of the tournament, how many shots of Coach K and his wife? 15, 20? What do you think?
There's got to be like a Vegas spread on that, don't you think?
They have to. So who do you think plays the title game? Duke, Kansas? Is that your?
I'll say Duke, Kansas. Yeah, that's what I'd go with right now.
And then have you thought about that game enough, or are you still in Final Four mode? I want to get a final pick from you if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, I'm not really, and I do obviously the Quick Scout blog for can'tsay.com, and people have asked me too much about the Villanova pick right now because it's like, well, give me some time here. I'm doing laundry to make sure I can fly my way out to New Orleans tomorrow. So I need to look more into that matchup. But yeah, Duke, elite offensively, I'd put them up there with Gonzaga as far as offense goes and being on that level. But defensively, there's some question marks, and any team that sort of has to go to that zone, I just
Don't like it.
Like I
Don't
like
it.
I like it for Kansas that they will probably right at this moment they're watching that Duke zone and going, here's what we can do. Here's how we can get Ochai Agbaji on a lob. Here's how we can get Ochai Agbaji with a corner three. And that's just a little bit more manipulatable than a man-to-man defense is normally. So, yeah, that would be an amazing matchup. But potentially, again, Kansas would be a small favorite and be pretty amazing for this Kansas team. We just talked about not being the best of Bill Self era, all those sorts of things. But they would be favored in all 6 games of the NCAA tournament. That's a pretty good feat, regardless of how good they are.
I will. One more thing about Duke, real fast. That Tech game, I feel like gave him so much confidence. And Banchero, I had some doubts about him, maybe as a number 1 pick type guy. I know it was Roach who closed it out, but Banchero was fantastic. I just thought he was absolutely fantastic. I would love to see KU and Duke. So, Jesse, I appreciate your time. I know you have a press conference. Lance Leipold, KU football, spring football, baby, it's back. Where can people find you and your work in all of its variety?
Yeah, Jesse Newell on Twitter, and then can'tsay.com is the coverage for the Final Four. But yep, flying out tomorrow. We'll have a big contingent. So anybody wondering about those stories, we have some great ones up. I know Arvai Gregorian talked to Bill Self about his father who just passed away this season, and so got some insight on that. Sam McDowell, our other columnist, wrote about Bill Self's halftime talk against Miami, which everybody wants to know about. So all that sort of insight can be found on the Stars website if you're trying to look for the bigger or the greater details from this KU Final Four run.
Jesse Newell, KC Star. Appreciate your time, man.
All right. Thanks for having me.